Awesome. So taking it away, thank you everybody. My name is John Gruszczyk. I'm a product manager for Microsoft Teams, helping look after anything security, compliance, and privacy related um, within the Teams ecosystem. And I think that even extends out into this whole collaboration space. So today we're going to be talking about something really top of mind for many folks, and that's creating a data governance and protection strategy. And it's one of the top questions I've always gotten since I've been in this role of, how do we think about protecting and governing our data, not just in regards to Teams, but as it starts to expand anywhere outside of Teams, as we talk about Teams being this awesome platform that's generating all this content, hooking in third parties and custom LOB apps. So how do we keep that data safe and secure as it kind of flows throughout our organization? So go ahead and get started. As Kevin mentioned, I do love questions. I'll be showing some live demos and stuff like that. So if you had the displeasure of having or seeing me in a presentation before, you do know that I love questions and interaction. So I'd love to hear from that. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. And you will see me glancing off to the right here a little bit to make sure I'm staying on topic with my session. But I want to start with kind of what we're hearing from our customers, and these probably are not that different than what many of you are kind of asking us or being asked from your customers. And first is just around protecting data from intentional and accidental sharing. So of course, we need sensitive data, whether it's PII type information, credit card numbers. We also need those sensitive business plans and product launches. At Microsoft, we do not want something to come out early that shouldn't quite be there. How do we protect participant privacy and sensitive data in meetings? Something that we actually did some discovery work with customers on that was a bit concerning was they didn't see meetings as a medium for data exposure. So if an unauthorized attendee is in this meeting at our awesome Teams Nation event here, and they're able to capture non-disclosed data, that's data leakage, right? And so we need to make sure that those attending our meetings are who we know, and that we're able to moderate that. Of course, top of mind, I think for everyone is this third one, how can we safely collaborate outside the organization? And the thing that I like to say, if you saw our Ignite session that we did, Microsoft Ignite session, is internal and external collaboration needs to be frictionless. Your end users and employees need to be able to work the same internally as they do externally. Otherwise, they're going to feel blocked and they're going to start trying to find workarounds. So we really need to enable that frictionless collaboration to not block productivity. Then the last two is just, how do we stay compliant with this crazy increase in communication and collaboration as we expand out Teams as a platform and integrate more into it? How do we create that data protection and governance strategy? So I've done a couple blogs on this on our Microsoft Teams tech community that I know Chris has commented on and given us some great insight, but we need to keep kind of advising on this. And so we're going to do some cool updates today and also share where we're thinking, where we're investing on the Teams side. And let me go ahead and continue here. My slideshow stopped itself. Here we go. Quickly, I'd like to tee this up. We like to lead with this because it actually defines how we garner our security and compliance strategy. So you've probably seen this slide before, built-in experiences to work across platforms, AI automation, and then this third area is the one that's most important to me, is integrated across people, devices, apps, and data. What this means is your strength and intelligence from Microsoft 365 security and compliance flows throughout your collaboration ecosystem, right? It's not just applied to Teams. It's not just applied to SharePoint. These are all collaboration services. And so the way that Microsoft thinks about security and compliance and the way that we approach it is it needs to integrate in all those spots without requiring all this extra work or custom policies. We want to just snap things in as another service layer. And so this is one of my favorite places to start. Understanding the data landscape, we need to be able to protect and govern it wherever it lives, across devices, across your Microsoft cloud, across on-premises solutions, third-party clouds, anywhere along the lines. And so this is going to the framework that we're going to be talking through today. Know your data, protect it and prevent data loss, and then create your governance strategy for data. So I realize I'm going a little bit quick, but these are kind of just teeing up the discussion that we're going to have, and I want to hop kind of into the meat of our content today. So the first one is knowing your data, identifying the important data, and also very critically, the data volume behind this, right? So we need to be able to assess what kinds of sensitive data do we have, where does this live? Again, is it all on the cloud? Is it on premises? Is it in LOB apps? Is there a mix of things, which is likely the truth? And then from how much of this exists. And the way that I like to frame this up is we look at kind of two types of data, structured and unstructured. Structured data is that very machine learning identifiable, so things like credit card numbers, passport numbers, things that we can create trainable classifiers for, or essentially that machine learning or intelligence to be able to identify. Then we have that unstructured data, which is often the majority of an organization. And these are things like those, product specifications, functional specs, product launches that are, things that we need to actually manually classify or encrypt, or essentially we as the business have to actually safeguard this. It's not something machine learning can always recognize. So unstructured data is really what keeps a lot of people up at night, and we'll talk about how to kind of address that. The last one, of course, is how is this data being accessed and shared? So again, where is this living? What type of governance controls do we have on it? Then we're going to hop ahead to protecting your data and preventing data loss. And typically at Microsoft, this is actually two different stages. I combine it together because I think if you're protecting your data, you also have the mindset that you want to prevent your data loss. So, how do we protect sensitive data and where can we protect it? So building off those last two questions. But I think the most important top of mind thing for me here is, again, how do we balance that security and productivity for our end users? So how are we making sure that they can safely collaborate inside and outside the organization without blocking them, and not only just blocking them, but making things easy, right? So being able to generate a shared link for a OneDrive file and easily check how it should be shared versus making them go through multiple loops, right? Like maybe going through a quick wizard where you have to generate who should view this, right? The more daunting and more challenging you make it for end users, the more likely they may not be educated or are aware of how to actually use it, and the more likely they may circumvent it. And that's something that we see a lot of times when different third-party storage service providers or communication tools get brought into an ecosystem, what we like to call shadow IT, is it creates data exposure, right? And it might not always be intentional, but the problem is once that service exists, and not picking on any services, but if we integrate Box and Dropbox and Slack and Zoom or whatever it may be, if we start sharing one file there, even though that I think it's safe because I'm just sending it to Chris and Kevin, what happens when that's actually not safe, right? Because we're doing something outside of our governed IT ecosystem. So we really need to figure out how to empower end users to be productive while having that security and compliance working in the back end that we know is protecting on the organization. So let's hop into it. Protecting documents and information in Teams. So security and compliance without interrupting productivity. First area, and I sound like a broken record with this if you've heard me speak before, is configuring and setting up data loss prevention, or DLP, for Microsoft 365. And this is something many of our customers have already configured for things like Exchange with Mail and SharePoint. We've extended it to Teams over the last year by default with E3 to just cover some basics. For E5, you can actually cover full Teams chat and channel messages. But this is that machine learning, that structured data. So you're able to create data loss prevention policies to look for things like credit card numbers and passports, and actually meet certain, leverage some of our pre-programmed policies to look at things like GDPR, or in the US we have the Patriot Act. So data loss prevention can really help target that structured data, and if someone shares something that shouldn't be through Teams, it actually is going to block that message. And then double down, we can even educate that end user. And that's the most important part, because we can't just block data. It protects the organization, but it's not educating the end user. So we want to make sure that we're informing them of why that data shouldn't be shared. The cool thing about DLP, and we'll talk about it in just a minute as I hop into a demo, is you can actually customize the policy tips too. So by default, if you share a credit card number, it will get blocked. And the policy tip might say, hey, it's a credit card number, you shouldn't share it. If I wanted to, I can actually customize that. So if I think of myself in a large Contoso Microsoft-like organization, maybe that's default. If I'm in a smaller organization where I'm, as IT, able to customize that and have a little bit more time to create some flexibility, some personality, I could have a nice message. It's like, hey, I'll use a different one. I think Northwind Traders we're still allowed to use as a fictitious name. Hey, Northwind Trader Group, this is something that we shouldn't be sharing with each other because it's a credit card number and we shouldn't share financial information, right? So you can actually add some personality to it based on your organization. But again, the defaults work really well too, because it's very explicit that, hey, you shouldn't share this because of why. The next one, sensitivity labels. This is something we've got some good reception on. This is not just specific to teams. Hopefully, quite a few of you are already using sensitivity labels as part of the Microsoft information protection strategy to classify sensitive data. And so this is things like documents and other content that you apply a sensitivity label that will encrypt the content and determine access based on that sensitivity label applied. Over the last 6 months, we took sensitivity labels and integrated them into Teams so that not only does it respect any type of sensitivity labels applied to documents, but you can actually apply a sensitivity label to a team. And what that's going to do is if I apply a sensitivity label to one of my teams that IT has created, it's going to apply those restrictions to a team. So if that sensitivity label says that no one outside the organization should have access, it's actually a way we can create a team that then doesn't allow guests in it. Or maybe anytime that I use a sensitivity label called Project Cortana, it means that it is a lockdown restricted group because it's a very high classified project. If I apply that to the new team I created, it means every single person will have to be invited. No one by default can join that group. So these sensitivity labels are really what helps that unstructured data and are really a critical layer of document protection, because when we talk about encryption, and we'll get into it a little bit later in the session, encryption works in layers. And so there's all types of different layers when we talk about application level, service layer, and of course, data is encrypted in transit and at rest through Microsoft data centers. But you need a content level encryption strategy, and that's what sensitivity labels are, because if you're not encrypting content at the source, it's able to spread easily and it could potentially be decrypted. And so the key with encrypting it at the source is even if I share a document from Microsoft that I've encrypted and said through sensitivity labels, anyone inside Microsoft can use this. If I forward that document to my personal Outlook mail, I will not be able to open it because I don't have the governance on the back end. And so encrypting content at source is a critical layer to have as part of your organization. And again, we'll kind of hop into that a little bit later, but sensitivity labels are probably my #1 thing for most organizations to get set up and get using, because the other side of it is every organization will create a different level of sensitivity labels, how many they need, the guidance on it. So you're going to need to build some end user training and education on how sensitivity labels work within your organization. So it is a bit of a heavy lift. I don't want to kind of gloss over that, but it is an extremely impactful part of the business. So last two there, communication compliance. This is really going to help kind of foster that safe, inclusive workplace and monitor things like internal violations. And then the great thing about Teams being a part of that Microsoft 365 ecosystem is you're able to inherit features like protection against malicious attachments in files. And then also very soon, we will be formally GAing safe links in Microsoft Teams. So that gives you that really cool, when you think of it, that detonation chamber where you click a link and it goes in that detonation chamber, and we blow it up to make sure it's safe, so that your end users aren't being kind of targeted through anything like a malicious URL or a malicious attachment, which unfortunately we know is a very easily and heavily used mechanism to breach organizations. And so I want to pause there because I'm going to go ahead and switch over to a demo. But the one thing I also want to say is with sensitivity labels, and this is something we recently rolled out, is that same co-authoring that you could do across Mac, Windows, rich client on the desktop, web office app. We've extended that to include sensitivity labels. And this is key because if you're in an encrypted document, you need to be able to collaborate real time with other folks across Office platform, across how it's what type of app you're using. And so that's something we also launched in the fall Microsoft Ignite, or excuse me, spring Microsoft Ignite, is that ability to collaborate seamlessly, have autosave on with documents with the sensitivity label applied. So I am going to switch over here and actually pull open this demo screen here. So let me go ahead and change out my screen to my other side. Let's see here. There we go. And so I'm going to switch over to and zoom in a bit here so everyone can see and we are accessible for our audience.
Just a quick one, John. There was a question from Michelle. Did you see that one? When using DLP with sensitivity labels, there's a delay between the time a file is shared, say in Teams, and where the recipient can open it when the DLP scan kicks in.
I did not see that question. Yes, that is, it can never be fully true real time. And so something we're always working on is decreasing that delay. That's something actually you're seeing as well with, and I'm sharing some stuff here, but with this continuous access policy. It's something we're working on with SharePoint and OneDrive with conditional access, where we actually, and I know I'm kind of diving off topics here, but it's this idea that instead of assessing a person and their device every hour, whether those conditions are still true, we're actually expiring that token and checking it almost in real time. And so that's something with DLP is we'll never be able to just be honest, to do something as it was sent. We need to scan it, check it through the system. So what we are trying to do is always decrease that lag time behind it and make it near instantaneous. And so I do hear the feedback, and we are thinking through of how we can make that quicker. But unfortunately, with part of that is it needs to go through its checks and balances in order to actually classify and apply it as appropriate. That's why if you send a message that is blocked by DLP, technically the receiver will briefly see that message until DLP does kick in and actually remove it. It's just the way that technology works, and it's also to protect the service in itself. So I'm going to switch over here to our DLP section. And so this is in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. And you'll see here that I have a couple of policies already created. Thankfully, I finally did fix my naming conventions here, except for the Canada one. So I do apologize because that's bad IT hygiene. But what I want to show here is just the ease of integrating in here. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this existing policy called my Contoso General PII. And we'll go ahead and switch to the next screen. Great thing here is, again, you have that coverage across your Microsoft 365 landscape. So this is not an uncommon scenario where an organization, especially back in the Office 365 days, first moved to mail, right, to Exchange. I did a lot of velocity migrations overnight. I've been there coming from the field. And so you could actually just say, hey, we want to have this applied to Exchange first. And as you roll out additional services, you can switch those on. Same thing you'll see here for Teams chat and channel messages. And another big thing I like to talk about here is because in this world of compliance and regulatory obligations, you can use both inclusion and exclusion properties here. And so why I like to mention exclusion is because maybe you have user groups or certain business departments that need heightened DLP policies applied to it. So my general policy might look for things, GDPR, a couple other high-level ones. Maybe we have a pocket of users that are very, very governed and restricted. So we actually want to exclude them from this policy and apply a DLP policy much more exhaustive and focused on them that we can then include them in the next. And so again, there's a lot of customization and flexibility here to apply DLP as you need it in your organization. I always do get a little bit nervous using my test tenants because I never know what secret little Easter eggs you'll get to see. But you'll see we're always expanding DLP and where we can apply that to. Shouldn't say always, but we are focused on expanding it across that ecosystem and working through things like on-prem solutions. So as we go to the next page here, once you've figured out where it will cover, this is your custom DLP rules. And the great part about this is you can actually build a DLP policy from scratch where you would create all those rules, or you can leverage existing ones that we've had like GDPR in this example. And you can also do a mix. So I can actually leverage an existing template and then start creating my own rules here and add conditions as needed, actions. And the thing that I like here is you can edit things like the user notifications, and even better, I like to actually, when going back to those policy tips, I like to customize my policy tips when I play around with it. And I've even worked with some smaller customers that really did like customizing it to be very kind of personable and friendly with your organization to say, hey, this is why you shouldn't be sharing it because it's part of this. Reach out to your IT team, or specifically in this case, it was someone's name because it could be handled. Again, thinking of a Contoso-sized organization might not be as feasible, but again, that's the beauty of this is you have flexibility. And so I will back out of that. And then the last thing about the policy, and this is another cool thing, is you can actually run it in test with policy tips enabled. So again, in this world where you might not always have time to actually set something up in a test environment, or your test environment isn't able to simulate the 5,000, 10,000 users in your prod organization, you can start testing it out and you can understand what that insights look like. And we do a lot of that across our M365 security and compliance portfolio to help you get insights and understand what would be going on. So maybe you're not ready to start actually applying these protections or governance layers, but you want to see what it would look like if you did. And again, that's that gap between that kind of, pre-prod and prod levels that maybe not every customer is afforded, especially with how fast things move. So testing policies, I think, is very valuable. You see that with things like multi-factor auth and some of the device conditional access and device controls that we could have with MDM solutions. It is useful to test policies, so I always like to bring this up with folks. So just moving my head here because I do have to back out of this policy, and what we actually want to do here is sorry, moving my camera down to cancel out. That's the beauty of having multiple monitors here. There we go, still good. Now I want to hop into our Teams client and see what that would actually look like. So again, I was talking about if Megan, in this case, Megan Bowen was talking with someone, get some lunch, shared a credit card, and you'll see that it was blocked. And this is what the end user experience looks like. And back to Michelle's question, again, I will be transparent. It does not instantly block it. It will actually go through, and that's when the DLP service will quickly in near real time scan it and then identify that it needs to be blocked. But if I sent this again, you would see that it would initially go through, and then you would see this slight red hue on the background, and then you see this policy tip appear. So as I click on it, again, your message was blocked due to the organization for a credit card number. This is customizable. We can even do something where we allow the end user to override it and either provide a justification or no justification at all. And again, this is based on your organization. If you are a small org that feels like you have a very good control over your end users, you can allow them to override in the case of false positives. Go ahead, Kevin. Oh, I think we're all good.
Apologies, no, wrong keyboard. Sorry,
it's all good. And so again, this is the flexibility in a Microsoft world with 130,000 employees. I will just say, maybe we don't let people override because we don't want to create tickets and all this stuff. But maybe in a much smaller organization, the Teams Nation group, maybe they can allow an override or say, hey, you need to report to Chris or whatever. So again, the flexibility in this is very, very key. And then the next area I want to go to is when we talked about sensitivity labels. So I can actually, as we talk about creating them, I won't hop back into our compliance center, but those same sensitivity labels our IT group has set up and created for files, we can extend them to SharePoint and Teams containers. And so what we'll do here is as I go and actually create a new team, I'm going to go ahead and say from scratch, you'll see that sensitivity label drop down appear. And so these are 3 sensitivity labels that I've configured for my organization. And based on whatever one I apply, it's going to apply that sensitivity label settings to the team itself. And you'll see all 3 of mine are private. And so as soon as I select this project Cortana, or actually I like to do the confidential finance one, the only option to me creating this team would be private. So again, everyone will have to be invited, and then we can do and increase permissions and things like exclude guests, so that essentially this label would mean that, hey, not only does everyone have to be invited to join this team, no guests are allowed in because this is finance and this should only be done by internal Contoso employees. So I'll select private, I'll give it a name. I'm going to call it the Teams Nation Finance Group. They must be rolling in the dough with this event because it's the best that there is. Going to go ahead and create it, and then we'll see what the UI looks like. Sometimes this screen goes a little bit nuts, but we do look good. I'm going to go ahead and skip here. And as we're in this team now, Teams Nation Finance Group, you'll see that our sensitivity label applies up here in the top hand right screen. So the same way that you'll see that little kind of UI that lets you know that, hey, guests are a part of this organization, you also see that sensitivity label apply up here as well. And something we're constantly working on, and we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from our MVP community and our Teams Nation community, is around how we're displaying sensitivity labels and where you can apply them to. One of the feedback we've gotten is, hey, we'd love to apply sensitivity labels to chats and specifically channels. So not sharing anything quite yet, but we are very heavily looking at how we can continue to integrate sensitivity labels in. Again, top of mind for us is always not making this too daunting or too confusing, because one of the honest pieces of feedback we get is the more sensitivity labels you create, the more confusing it could be for end users on what to properly apply. Some of the irony in the standard ones that we recommend is that we use, highly confidential. Those two themselves can be a bit confusing for folks. So that's why I do recommend work with all of your business stakeholders and define what those sensitivity labels are that are appropriate for your organization, that you can train and educate your end users on and make it clear the differences, and then they can apply as needed. And so
was one question, sorry, that was on purpose that time. Denver Ang asked, how about the Teams mobile notifications? Would it remove the notification with the message? Currently, I'm still able to see deleted messages on the notifications.
Yes, that is a fair question and something we're actively working through. And I think this whole idea of notifications, chat policies, and the changing of chat is something we're constantly looking through, and how we can make sure that we're ensuring data integrity for things like e-discovery, retention, but also to that point, if a message is blocked, we need to be able to go as far as actually the notification in itself. So in product today, it's not quite there, but this is something we are working through. The challenge, just to be very honest, is in that retention space and ensuring and preserving the data integrity, that our compliant solution can pick up everything that originally happened and archive it. But then, of course, to this point, the end user should see that actual DLP applied end user view. So it's something we are working on. And a very fair question. I'm going to switch back over. Thanks for that, Kevin. I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the presentation here. Give it a second to pull up. There was our demo. I'm always ahead of myself. So the next slide, we talk about creating a governance strategy. And so this is, I'll just be very transparent. This is a lot of business conversations. This is a lot of meeting with stakeholders and identifying who the correct stakeholders are in the organization to have input on this. So what type of data do we need to retain, and how long does that data need to be retained? How do we need to treat it? You might have different user groups and different pockets of people that have different retention requirements based on where they sit or the industry that they're in, et cetera. So creating a governance strategy is one of the very early steps that you need to meet with stakeholders, and I'll summarize that at the end. But this is truly a lot of discussions, working with your, of course, legal teams, HR, working with your LOB app developers and tooling and processing teams. Everyone kind of needs to get together to understand what type of data is flowing when we talk about some of those early questions and know your data. But this is the point where you need to have those critical stakeholders that understand what the business is confined by. So understanding those external requirements that in the bluntest word means money, right? Like if we're getting fined because we're not properly retaining data or we're not storing it properly, that means fines against the business in some of these cases, and very, very steep fines. So not that we all want to be driven by money, because some of this is true when we talk about legal cases and e-discovery. Same thing, we want to make sure that we have everything preserved that we would be required to, so that when that proceeds forward and we're working with a government, or we're working with any type of legal obligation, that we as the organization have what's needed. So this is very, very much a large discussion section, and I realize it comes last in what we're talking about, but this is something that should be started very early on, because again, part of this is just weeding through all of your business groups to understand who needs a seat at the table and make sure that they're providing the correct input and decisions on how to assess data and how it needs to be retained based on standards. I do see the comment here as well. So I pulled up the chat, so as questions come in, I'll be able to answer them in better time now. So I won't drain this entire slide. This is more of a security and compliance all up, but this just talks about some of the information governance life cycle. And I do like this slide because it includes third-party data, which needs to just be default, right? It's not realistic to think that every customer in the world is going to be Microsoft and Microsoft only. We actually want to open this up for collaboration, and Teams as a platform is meant to include third-party services, and quite a few of them, right? And so it's things that you need to snap in as part of your everyday work. And it's something we're hearing from customers, right? We want all of our end users to be able to use one tool and be inside the context of Teams without having to app switch, because we know app switching and changing platforms could lead to data leakage, accidental. And so Teams as a platform helps centralize this, but it means that we as Microsoft really need to double down on supporting those third-party services. And so that's something cool that Microsoft Cloud App Security does. We can extend out security policies and our CASB broker to those third-party apps, but also from a governance lifecycle, we need to be able to classify against this. So through things like in-place management and automated policies with retention, we can scan across this. And you'll see that's my favorite part there is when it all moves together and we have our records management down at the bottom with the diamonds. This is a quick screenshot versus hopping into a demo. Again, creating a retention label. We can choose to where it's going to apply to, how long we want to retain things for. And again, the very, very specifics that you're probably working with your legal group on, maybe HR, other executives in the organization on how the retention needs to work. And then we also have records mutability. And so this is actually being able to, not quite Denver's question, but this idea that sometimes we need to preserve data as it was. And so as documents may be changing and may be edited, we actually need to save that, save that versioning that was done. And so this is a little bit of a deep hole I don't want to go down, but again, we are constantly looking at how do we support those organizations that have very, very strict standards and controls here. And records mutability is one of those ways that we can preserve versioning controls to ensure that we can retain and archive that. Next area I want to talk about is something that if you came to our Microsoft Ignite session, we mentioned this. It unfortunately has not GA'd yet. I'll actually use Teams Nation as a chance to say we are targeting early June. We have gone through quite a bit of feedback with some customers and positive feedback in making sure that our day one experience is optimal for IT groups. And what Microsoft 365 Multi-Geo is, for those unaware, is the ability to actually specify where that user's data sits in the Microsoft data centers. And so at this time, we do support 16 different data center locales. We call them geolocations, or in short, geoloc, or different abbreviations, but you'll see geos on the slide. And so what you're able to do is with Microsoft 365, with Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, is I'm going to say that, Chris, your data needs to sit in, let's say, the European Union data center, and then Kevin, yours is going to sit in the Australia data center, and all of your data should sit there. Now we are happily extending support to include Microsoft Teams, and this is actually going to work down to the end user and team level. So again, it's going to work the same way with an Exchange. I want to be clear that you cannot configure multi-geo per service. So I can't decide that Kevin's Teams is going to sit in the EU, his Exchange is going to sit in Australia. It's not meant for express route or are trying to shorten hops. It's meant for customers that are under strict data residency requirements or sovereignty requirements where they need to keep data in a specific data center. And so the extension to Teams will mean that as Kevin creates chats, and sorry, Kevin, I keep picking on you. As Kevin and Chris are chatting, I'm able to ensure that their data, their Teams data that's being generated is storing in the correct geolocale. And so the way that it will work, just to get into some of the nuances when it comes to something like a chat, the owner of the chat is the creator. So the very first one to actually send the message becomes the owner of the chat, and that's where that data will sit. So if I send a message to Kevin and Chris, I am the owner of that chat, and that chat data will sit wherever my geolocale was specified. If I was not specified a geolocale, it will sit at where the tenant default is. So I may be just a standard user that my data is going to sit whatever data center my tenant specifies, but Kevin and Chris might be, again, set to specific geolocales. For the team, it's based off of the Office or M365 group, everyone's favorite groups. So for a team, a wider group of people that we can't say, hey, this was the first person who created it, we're going to use that group level property that is assigned. And again, same thing here. If you did not assign it to the group an actual geolocale, it's going to use your tenant default. And so Really, really cool part about this is once this formally GAs in June, again, fingers crossed, the day one scenario is if you have Microsoft 365 Multi-Geo enabled and set up for Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive currently in use, only thing you need to do, validate that your licenses are applied appropriately. Because when Teams rolls out for support, it will start working, which is awesome. We do not want to bog down IT admins, SecOps teams, and having to configure things. It will start working, and it will start expecting those PDLs, or what's called a preferred data location, that IT sets, and will specify that geolocale. So again, as long as I have my PDL set that says I need to be using the Australia data center for Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive, when Teams GAs as a service within Multi-Geo, it will automatically start applying to it. And so all new data being created will go to that locale and will work to migrate that existing data over time. And this is something that no other industry solution actually comes anywhere close to, right? I don't want to call out competitor names, but some of them, they may offer some type of data residency across general regions. They don't have an answer for migrating that existing data, which makes you non-compliant. So again, this is a compliance-based solution. It's meant to help with data residency. I want to be clear, it is not meant to help with express route. It is not to try and get closer to a data center to pick up speed. It is meant to help customers that need to store their data in specific data centers. So I am very excited about this. This is something that I think is something that Microsoft does best in class, and that we need to keep doubling down and extending on this. So you'll see a full detailed write-up, again, hopefully early June. We'll share the formal GA, and we'll go ahead and get a write-up on this, and folks can start taking advantage. So the last area of the presentation I want to get into, and we'll also open to questions, is this idea of encryption. And this is something we're working on internally at Microsoft to share a wider vision of how to think about this. The very first thing I want to land on is it's not scary. It's also a very big buzzword right now, unfortunately, which means many of you IT pros are probably hearing from friends and family members, and unfortunately maybe even customers, about what they think encryption is and what it probably isn't. And so I want to kind of dive into that because, again, early in the session, I talked about our encryption layers. You need an encryption strategy in your organization, but how much you need to configure yourself and how much you're able to rely on services like Microsoft will determine what type of advanced strategy you need here. So let me go ahead and advance my slide here. I did think this was a pretty cool graphic. First, I want to lead with this. Our priority is protecting customer data, and this should really be any organization that is a software vendor, right? Microsoft offers encryption options that meet customer needs, whether you use our managed keys or if you have additional requirements to control those root keys, we actually provide solutions for that, which we'll get into. Most importantly, a customer's data is a customer's data. It means it's your data. You can access it at any time that you want. It is your data. We double down on that, right? You need to be able to access your data anytime, and you own it, not Microsoft. We are not snooping on it. It is not any part of our business. It is customer data. And so what we need to do, though, is allow you to, if you need additional encryption options on that data, encrypt it as needed. But as a baseline, as I hop into the next slide, everything is encrypted in transit and at rest. And the reason why we actually do that, and it's not what we call end-to-end encrypted, is because as it moves through nodes and points, customers need to and have the right to decrypt content as needed. And so that's actually why we do encryption in transit and at rest. It's so that customers can decrypt that content as they see fit or as needed, whereas end-to-end encryption actually means from point to point, it is unencryptable and undiscoverable. So end-to-end encryption actually oftentimes can block unfortunately, can block compliance solutions or a company's compliance strategy to meet their obligations. And we'll talk about that kind of at the end. But the encryption in transit and at rest is what you see most kind of industry solutions do. It is kind of the standard or default. And when I say industry standard, I just mean software industry standard, right? Every type of content needs to be encrypted. It should be encrypted in transit and at rest. It needs to be protected in that data center. And so I won't drain this slide because you also have your protections in the data center using BitLocker and some DKM solutions. But this is key, right? Everything as a baseline, the way that Microsoft 365 as a service treats your data, always encrypted in transit and at rest. And so when I talked about customers that may have additional compliance requirements, and so this is something that where we get customers that reach out and say, hey, that's perfect, but Microsoft, I can't use your managed keys. As part of my regulatory obligations from industry or regional, my government is telling me that I need to maintain control over those root encryption keys. And that's what customer key is. And so what customer key builds off of is something called service level encryption, which is encrypting at the application layer. And so service encryption with customer key allows the customer to provide those root keys to Microsoft to encrypt the data. And this is something that has been available for Exchange and SharePoint and OneDrive. And like the way the session has gone, we are very, very happily extending support to include Microsoft Teams. And this is something that has not formally GA'd, but I'll share with Teams Nation here. It will be GAing this month. If not, fingers crossed, I'll have a blog going out sometime this week or next, which will announce the formal GA. But what it does is, again, additional compliance control that you can control those root keys. It's built into the service. We have all the auditing capabilities to it. So it is an additional feature that is paid for. And the reason why I mention that is because this isn't something that a customer should think, oh, well, that sounds cool. I want to provide my root keys because I don't trust Microsoft. That's not what this is for. This is for customers that are literally being told by regulatory requirements and providers that you need to provide your root keys and you need to control them. And so, again, it's still going to be encrypted in transit and at rest. It's just using your own key. So you're not actually getting heightened encryption. It's just you're managing and controlling those keys. So again, very excited to see this go into GA. This whole idea of kind of encryption across your tenant with a data encryption policy is great because we can, again, help customers that need additional requirements. Some additional capabilities that I like to bring up here is customer lockbox. And I won't dive super deep into this, but this is based on the idea that I came from our field in Microsoft Consulting Services. I've done a lot of work with our customers on troubleshooting and tickets that were opened up through engineering. When a customer opens up a ticket with Microsoft Engineering, if the root issue or the service fix needs to be done at the customer level, Microsoft Engineering will access customer data through the service, right? And this is all very valid in the fact that we're doing this to help support the customer. What Customer Lockbox does is it actually requires approval from the customer. And again, this is an upsell service for compliance reasoning. This is not something that is meant to be an additional security feature because it is targeted to help with organizations that are under very, very strict compliance controls. We do not access your customer data because we see that something's not working in Exchange and we need to troubleshoot it, right? We make sure that engineers are not accessing data. We have all of our defense in depth and contractual commitments on the Trust Center that we explain all this very well. But I just like to talk about Customer Lockbox because it's an additional compliance solution, but it also can sometimes be confused by customers with this idea of, oh, we want this because we want to make sure that Microsoft reaches out to us every time. We're not into your customer data. It's used in the very rare case that you have a service level fix that you've opened a ticket for, and our engineers need to work directly on your side of the house. The next area is email encryption. So building off of that sensitivity labels and Microsoft information protection, it's this idea that you need to encrypt the content at its source. And so OME or Office 365 message encryption is something great that's integrated in. And so I believe quite a few people are probably already taking advantage of that, but it's another area of that content layer encryption. So we've talked about encryption at the data center and in transit as data flows, but we also want to encrypt content in itself. And again, that's a very, very critical encryption layer because while data is encrypted in transit and at rest, we also want to encrypt the content in itself so we know that wherever it goes, we have those protections there. And that's that last area of sensitivity labels for content encryption with Microsoft information protection is, again, that content layer encryption. And so go ahead.
Sorry, John, just a quick 5-minute-ish warning, just to give a bit of time for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, this is the last slide. I'm going to leave this up. I am not going to drain this entire slide. I do have a helpful resources one, but this is meant to show all of the work that we're doing. And again, my job as a PM for Microsoft Teams and security and compliance is to not think unique to Teams. It's to think across the entire Microsoft 365 space, and that's what you see here. So thank you, Kevin and Chris, for moderating, and I will go ahead and say what is up, Teams Nation, and what's top of mind.
Okay, we've got one question from Jeffrey about licensing for Multi-Geo. John, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I'm not seeing the questions come up, so it might be something going on my side. But for licensing, it is an additional license. Multi-Geo is a additional licensing SKU, but it does include the entire Microsoft 365 services. So it's not like you need to buy licensing just for Teams Multi-Geo. It would be included across the entire suite. So you'll see if you just do a quick web search for Microsoft 365 Multi-Geo, you'll see the licensing plan. It is a one-off kind of SKU that you can purchase, and it is only required for users. So when we talk about in the context of groups are actually covered under the tenant for licensing. You will actually apply your Microsoft 365 Multi-Geo license to end users. So that's why I mentioned if you're already using it and you're going to take advantage of Teams when it GAs, only thing you need to do is make sure your users are still licensed. So hopefully it really means nothing other than it will just start working. But I do just want to add that, just make sure your licensing's good and you're ready to go.
And just a follow-up question to that, John, do you see kind of certain regions where there is this demand for Multi-Geo for Teams, or within certain verticals or within certain size organizations such as mid-market or enterprise?
Yes to all of those, Chris. Large organizations like even Microsoft, right? This is something that we didn't just think would be cool. We get impacted by this as well with data residency, and so especially quite a few areas in the U.S., or excuse me, not in the U.S. where we aren't as data friendly. In the EU, we've seen this be a little bit more strict, and I think you'll see. I won't share anything too much, but I think you'll see some exciting announcements about creating more geolocales, actually, right? So we have the EU one, we've extended to Germany. You will start seeing more targeted data centers roll out that customers can take advantage of. So for instance, if since I won't be sharing any information with this, if you're a customer that sits in Greenland and you don't have a Greenland data center yet and you can only use an EU one, you will see us actually focusing on helping you meet more of those compliance regulations. Great question, Chris.
That's awesome. We've got one here from Vicky. She says, I'm interested about the question from earlier about the Teams app on personal and bring your own devices. We're in the same position. Vicky, was that just in terms of app protection policies on those devices, or a kind of strategy for dealing with that? Just see if she comes. Okay, well, we'll wait to see if she responds in the chat. We've got one from Mark this current time talking about attack simulation training. Will we see Microsoft Viva Learning connection there? We want to build up learning modules for staff and hope can tie it in. Obviously, that attack simulation and the thought of the kind of the human firewall as the last line of defense. Is that something on do you know if that's on the roadmap or something Microsoft's thinking about?
I can't commit formally to say anything's on the roadmap as much as working from the security and compliance side across collaboration space. Yes, like Viva, anything that is harnessing the power of signals and generating all of these awesome signals, like we have to apply enterprise grade security and compliance to it. And so what might not be in product yet, you'll continue to see us assessing it. I think Teams is a good example of that. And Chris and Kevin, you know this well. Over the past year, you've seen things like DLP, sensitivity labels, be enabled, Multi-Geo enabled for Teams. And so you will see Viva in that same sense. And now we're even thinking ahead of that, right? When we go to market with a new service and a new technology, we need to, as Microsoft, be leaders and say, by default, it's going to support these enterprise grade solutions. So while it might not be there yet, that is always top of mind for us. And Jeff T is, of course, thinking of that as well. So be on the lookout for that. But I just want to share company-wide and investment-wise, that is how we are thinking, right? These need to be showing up as default. They should not be things that come to market later.
That's absolutely awesome. Now, Vicky's just responded to that one. Yes, it is to do with app protection policies and the question about having the Teams app on personal and bring your own devices. What's your recommendation on that, John? How should we deal with that if there's people in our in your business, they have their own devices, they're not company issued? How do we protect the app?
Yeah, that's a great question because I'll just share here. I have a personal device that I have all of my Microsoft apps plugged into, and I'll just be very transparent in that when I first joined the company over 7 years ago and enrolled my device, I didn't feel great about the idea if Microsoft wipes my phone, I could lose my personal pictures, right? I don't know what they're doing. And that's where all of this MDM solution, and not just for Microsoft and Intune, we've really evolved, right? And it's this idea of app protection policies and actually treating at the app level versus the entire device. I think device level policies are great for when it's a company device, when it's personal. I want to ensure that Microsoft can only wipe the data that they own. And so that's where we get into what we call mobile application management, or even MAM without enrollment, to where we're applying those protections to only organizational data. And so the recommendation I'd have there is not just Teams, group in your collaboration services. So Outlook, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams. If someone's going to install that on their personal device, create an app protection policy that has things like conditional access on the back end or protections. And what it does is it means that if something happens where they lose that device or it needs to be wiped, you can wipe it and it's only focusing on that org data. So my personal OneDrive, my personal Outlook remain protected as an employee. And what we've seen and why that's important is it means they're more willing to enroll their device, their personal device, in the org, knowing very well that the org can't snoop on their personal text messages or WhatsApp messages, that the org is essentially only restricting those apps on the device that are owned by the org. So that the other thing I just add there is, yes, like any type of collaboration app, you can actually bucket them all together. And I actually have done a demo on this before where I create an app protection policy and I include like 6 or 7 collab apps. If you as an organization treat those the same from your security protocols and your compliance protocols, there's nothing that says you need to create an individual policy for each one. And so that's kind of that think smarter, not harder. If it works for your org, you can loop them in. If you do need separate policies, that's acceptable as well. And Chris and Kevin, I'd be curious if that kind of resonates with you as well, that it's we want people to bring their personal devices if they feel safe. And from the org side, we want to just make sure that we're only kind of looking at that org data and not snooping.
I'm exactly in the same boat as you, John. So I bring a personal device to my own place of work. It's got pictures on there of my family, my 4-year-old son. You know, I'm not 100% comfortable that I want some IT admins inside our organization being able to even put something on that, or you know, I'm not even comfortable with the fact that they might be able to wipe the device, you know, even in an emergency, because those are memories, those are things that I cherish. You know, I should probably back up those photos, you know, but I don't. I turn off the backup to, you know, just how we do in real life. And there's a halfway house to that. So there's the app protection policy. It makes my firm happy. It makes me happy, and we kind of, it's almost like a social contract and an agreement with the technology, so you know all parties are happy in this case.
Yeah, and a good thing is what you said there, Chris, too, and very quickly, is communicating to your end users what it can and can't do, right? And that's something we do at Microsoft. When you enroll your device and we have the job aid or the instruction on how to enroll your personal device, we are very clear what the org can wipe and what to do. And so I think part of that is just that security and you know, letting your end users know, hey, if you enroll your personal device, we can only touch your org data. Your photos, your texts are all safe, and not even just safe. We can't touch that. And I think that is actually important to clarify to your end users so that they do feel safe and they feel their privacy is respected.
Don't be like Chris though. Do back up your photos.
Yeah, I think OneDrive has some pretty slick auto upload capabilities.
Hey, that's why I do the security sessions, right, and the compliance with John, because I've made every mistake in the book that's possibly able to make on it. So I'm the user, the end user, relive through this. Well, John, you know, thank you ever so much. There is one more question from Mark, but I think we're going to have to make way for Erica's session. So I just want to say thank you ever so much. It's a real privilege to have you. I hope, fingers crossed, you know, we'll join forces again at Ignite this year. I'm sure something will come up on the agenda. But the session has been absolutely brilliant. It's been a real tour de force as the security and compliance within Microsoft 365 and as it applies to Microsoft Teams. So thank you ever so much.
Yeah, thank you, Teams Nation. This has been awesome. Chris, am I able to share my email that I want to make sure that folks might have had questions can reach out to me? I know I might be signing up for a boatload of emails, but I'd be happy to put my email in the chat if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hey, you know, I've got it. I email you.
Yeah, I encourage you because I just say I'm on the tech community with Chris and Kevin, so find me on there. But for Mark, I saw your question there, and anyone else, yeah, go ahead and reach out to me via email. I'm signing myself for an entire day. But thank you, Teams Nation. This is awesome, and I look forward to seeing y'all in the tech community.
Thanks ever so much, everyone.